Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's Tech Tuesday. Today we'll be talking about complex data center migrations. Our speaker today will be Clint Atkins, Practice Director, Cloud Services for Coretek Services. Please note, we will be recording this webinar, so it's available afterwards for you to review. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat window or raise your hand and we'll open the line for you to ask your question directly. We are very open to questions, so feel free to ask those along the way. Handouts will be available after the session. They will be emailed to you with a link to the recording of this webinar. With that, I will turn it over to Clint. Thanks for joining us, Clint.
All right, thank you all for attending today. So as Paula mentioned, we'll be reviewing the complex data center migrations and what Coretek's methodology is to simplify that process. So some of the things you'll see here today are Microsoft Azure specific migration paths, as well as Coretek customized paths. And I'll explain that as we move forward with this. So why Microsoft Azure? So as we look at Azure in the landscape of public cloud, Azure was truly designed for businesses, designed to host and run business applications from a hybrid perspective, globally, very secure. We'll get into some more security items later on in the webinar. Compliant. There's no other cloud platform that has more compliance certifications than Azure. It's truly built for businesses. And so, assuming that you're comfortable in that space, we'll jump into some common terms that we'll use throughout the migration. As we start looking at this, you have your traditional on-premise infrastructure where you as the customer manage your entire stack of infrastructure and data and applications. As you continue moving over, infrastructure as a service, also commonly called IaaS, you will manage the OS and above, and Microsoft would manage the virtualization layer, server, storage, and networking, and give you the platform. As you move over to the platform as a service, or PaaS, it's really where you're managing applications and data, and Microsoft is managing the runtime and below. So Microsoft completely manages the service and gives you that service so you can run your applications and data on top of it. And then software as a service, or SaaS, is where you're being provided the application to manage just the application itself only for your users in your environment, something similar to Office 365 or Salesforce, or one of those kind of platforms that are out there for you. So we always see people wondering, how do I get started? What do I need to do to really start this? I've made my decision to move to Azure. I realize that my organization needs it to be more innovative and scale with our customers. As we know, most organizations are moving to cloud platforms. But how do you really get started, and what should you do? And that's really what this webinar today is about, is to give you a simplified way to begin to move your infrastructure to Azure. Starting out with some best practices in Azure, everything still is people, processes, and technology. That's the way of our world of technology. So when we're talking about people from an Azure migration perspective, you've got organizational changes and mindset changes. How are you skilling those individuals in different teams so that they support your initiative to migrate to the cloud rather than push back and become roadblocks for you? Looking at making sure you have the right stakeholders engaged. And that's not only from an IT side, but that's also from a business side, and making sure you have that business voice more integrated in your migration methodology. from a planning and process perspective, again, building those business cases and really looking at what your motivations are and what your expected outcomes of it, of migrating to cloud platforms or Azure. Looking at actually tracking the migration and looking at how you actually are progressing on it so that your organization understands that holistically. And then jumping into technologies. So how are you going to govern your Azure environment? And these are all things that we're going to answer throughout this webinar today. So looking at different cloud migration strategies, you have 4 primary ways to migrate to Azure. You can rehost, refactor, re-architect, or rebuild. Today, we're going to primarily be focusing on rehosting. There are some other webinars out on Coretek.com about refactoring and app modernization as you look at refactoring, re-architecting, or rebuilding. There's also some up-and-coming webinars that are available from Microsoft.com or Coretek.com to give you some of that information. But today, we're going to really focus on the rehost side. So focus on reducing CapEx, freeing up your data center space, and enabling quick ROIs and quick wins for you when you're migrating to Azure. So we're going to focus on the IaaS side of things specifically. When we look at customers going through their Azure journey or their cloud journey, really the objective of organizations is to truly enable digital transformation. And I know that's a buzzword that's been used way too much, but ultimately, as you become more mature with your cloud journey overall, you really are able to enable your business to innovate. IDC said something along the lines of 60 or 70% of business transactions will be digital by 2022. I don't question that that's really the case. When you look at our global economy and where things are, so much of that is due to digital innovation. And without leveraging cloud technologies, I think a lot of organizations are really going to struggle to survive through that process. So really, as we start thinking about our cloud journey and how to get started and how to really start now, when you're going through this journey, there's some key areas that you need to hit as part of it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more whenever we talk about cloud adoption framework here in a future section. Our simplified migration methodology, and this is really truly focused on a data center migration methodology, is to assess, plan, migrate, manage, then optimize. And there's a lot of different reasons behind that when we're talking about data center migrations. Specifically, we rehost rather than looking at refactoring applications. Just the bottom line is, if you start an optimization as part of the planning phase, rather than just looking at rehosting, you're going to really struggle getting started. You're just going to continue to spin your wheels trying to figure out what's the best approach for specific applications, rather than moving your infrastructure as is and then focusing on optimization. No matter what, app modernization needs to be a core focus and needs to be the end game for you, so that you're not managing infrastructure, you're not managing servers, you're just able to really truly manage those applications and truly manage those the data behind those applications that you're serving. So really, as we talk about this from an assess perspective, as we jump into that phase, really what we're talking about is a cloud economic assessment of some kind. When you're looking at a cloud economic assessment, some of the key things you look at is what are your motivations and what are your outcomes you're expecting from this transformation. So why are you moving to the cloud? Truly define that. Make sure you understand, are you moving because there's a data center exit or a contract that's expiring at some colo, or is your building being sold and you're becoming more of a remote workforce? What's your critical business event that's really driving it? What are you looking at from a migration perspective? Are you looking at increasing your business agility? Are you looking to scale to meet your marketing demands or your market demands or geographic demands as you continue to move and grow global? Or are you looking at innovation? Are you truly looking to build new technical capabilities for your organization if you're a SaaS or software provider, or providing some sort of software to your customers? Are you looking at building new capabilities for your customers? What's your real motivations? And understanding that is so critical as you start this journey. If you don't understand your motivations and you don't understand what you're expecting to have out of it, and very much so, very important, understand what your line of business or your business owners are expecting out of it, you're going to struggle. So highly, highly recommend going through this initially and really getting alignment as an organization for your motivations and why you're moving, and then also what your outcomes are. So are they financial outcomes? Are they agility outcomes? Are you trying to reach people? Are you trying to connect more with individuals? Is it customer engagement that you're looking at more, or performance? Like, what are the reasons behind this? Are you looking at going from CapEx to OpEx to be able to manage your business better, so you can really control and understand costs a lot more? And it could be a number of these. It could, most organizations I see trying to reach 2 to 3 of these true outcomes. It's really, when you get down to it, everybody would say, oh, I would love all of these, right? But what are your real outcomes you're trying to get? And make sure, again, you have your business owners or line of business owners involved with these decisions. When you go through a cloud economic assessment, ultimately what you're doing is you're analyzing your infrastructure and you're identifying if they're a good fit for migrating to Azure or not. If they're not, what are the reasons behind that and how do you remediate that? Looking at things like right-sizing infrastructure. One of the reasons why you look at right-sizing infrastructure is when you're on-prem, you can over-provision in VMware. You can just scale up as much as you have. As long as you have plenty of infrastructure remaining, you can just continue to scale those servers. Well, when you move over to the cloud space, when you move over to Azure, you're paying for your consumption. You're paying for what you're utilizing. So you don't want to over-provision. You don't want to under-provision either, because performance can be impacted that way. But there are different tools out there. We personally use Stratazone, but there are a lot of different tools out there. Azure Migrate's one, Movere's one, another, Cloudamize. There are really a lot of them out there. Unified Cloud that can do these kind of assessments. But ultimately, leveraging a tool to identify right-sizing your infrastructure will save you a ton of money over time, and make sure that you're doing it in an efficient and effective way to not impact your business. What the typical timeline that we see, again, this is us, you can use it for however you would like to, but we usually see a 4 to 6 week process, give or take, worth of time, duration, to go through and do this cloud economic assessment. We typically are doing data collections for 2 to 3 weeks. We like to capture end of month activities if that's a process that's important to your business, to make sure that we're really capturing that high volume amount of infrastructure utilization that's occurring. We also make sure we have all the stakeholders involved, so that includes the business side, not just IT. We ensure we have the business stakeholders involved, so that we can make sure we're delivering what they expect. Again, going back to the motivations and outcomes, and making sure we're delivering to what their expectations are. And then going through, it'll take you a week or 2 to pull together all the data and have it in a presentable manner, so that you can consume it and have a final deliverable meeting of some kind. As we move into the plan phase, what we're really talking about here is Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework, or CAF. You can find it at the link below, or search for Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework in Google or Bing. And what it'll do is it's a methodology for you to leverage to ensure your organization is ready for Azure. We have been doing this for years before the CAF has been around, and we've always called it Cloud Foundations. And really, ultimately, this is a good data set and methodology for you with templates that you can leverage. And we've transitioned to use the same terminology and same approach as the CAF, or Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So you'll see here, we're continuing to go down this journey, this cloud journey, and we talked about cloud economic assessment first, and now we're jumping into the plan phase where we're talking about CAF. We see some of the components in defined strategy has already been done as part of the cloud economic assessment. You should, at this point, when you're going into your CAF engagement, really understand what your motivations and your expected outcomes are, and that way you can build your business justifications and prioritize any projects. Then whenever we move to the plan phase of CAF, specifically, digital estate, that's ultimately understanding what's going on in your infrastructure. Where is your data? Where are your applications? How do they run? And really getting a handle around what kind of dependencies are there? How do they interact together? How do customers access that data and access those applications? And really understanding that, ensuring that your organization's aligned properly, ensuring that all of your different IT organizations as well as business organizations understand their roles and responsibilities. We typically use RASCI charts as part of that for you. I think that's really important to do so that everybody understands what their role is in the cloud journey and being able to innovate and continue to change how they do business in your organization. Looking at what your skills readiness plan is, and really looking at how do we ensure that each member of each team is skilled to be able to translate what they've done in the past to what they're doing now in Azure. And then moving on to the ready, which is really where you're designing and building your Azure infrastructure. So you're doing things like, what's your subscription management look like? What's your identity management look like? How are you handling identity in Azure? How are you handling networking? Networking changes a lot when you move to cloud. What's your plan around that? What's your firewall plan? What's your governance plan? So how are you doing naming standards? How are you tagging infrastructure so that you can easily understand the cost of applications or lines of business or customers, or however you're slicing and dicing your data, so that you can really understand what that cost is to run that specific component. So the business can continue to do business justification on whether that component should be there. Looking at designing your security posture, what you're doing there. Again, we'll hit on that here in a little bit as well. And then actually building your core infrastructure or your landing zone. What's your Azure data center, your Azure subscription look like? And then you move into the adopt. Again, we're talking about migrations and doing rehost as part of this. And that's really what it is. And you always want to pilot. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But you'll want to pilot an environment, and then you'll want to actually then begin the migration of all the rest of the infrastructure. But what it does give you, once you have that core foundational environment, if you've gone through the defined strategy, plan, and ready phases, it really does allow your business to innovate easier, where you can make decisions on, should we be building new applications in a cloud native manner? Should we be doing more with our data and doing different data analytics? How should we handle that? And then, of course, you got your governor and your manage down at the bottom that you'll be continuously be doing, and ensure you follow those good guidelines. So as we jump into Azure and really look at it, is Microsoft invests a ton of money into security. What I always look at whenever I'm talking to customers and customers that we work with, it really gives you an opportunity to reset your security posture when you're moving to the cloud. Most organizations have some legacy uh, have legacy security controls in place for various reasons that may or may not be necessary anymore, or may be necessary for something that once was a certain way. But now, whenever you move into Azure, it really gives you an opportunity to reset that posture and improve it while enabling functionality still. And I think that's the key here is there are built-in controls with Azure. Microsoft spends a ton of money on actually ensuring that Azure's secure. You still will have your own responsibilities for the components that you're responsible for in Azure, as shown in the IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS platforms, but specifically the IaaS and PaaS platforms. So you'll own your security side of things, but Microsoft ensures the data center and the core infrastructure is secure. Also, there's a ton of tool sets out there for security. There's a bunch of security blueprints that are out there that'll give you good foundational templates to apply to your Azure environments. That way you can ensure and control that certain things are set up. Like a good example of a policy that can be set up through one of those blueprints would be to not enable servers to be spun up and run outside of certain data centers or regions. Another one would be not letting administrators or anybody with any sort of elevated controls to the Azure environment to be able to authenticate without enabling MFA or something along those lines. But there's a lot of those controls that you can set at the customer level to control your environment from a security perspective. And really, we're seeing a ton of traction in this for a lot of organizations that are able to really change how they do things. As we jump into the migrate phase, the third phase, ultimately, what we look at is doing a lift and shift migration. We leverage ASR, Azure Site Recovery, as our tool set. And the reason why is because we've built a lot of pipelines for DevOps to be able to help manage some of that process. Whereas there are other tool sets out there. There's a newer product called Azure Migrate. It's been around now for a year or so, but that does a lot of the automation for you. They're all free tools from Microsoft to leverage, and you can kind of pick and choose how you want to leverage those. But ultimately, as we're talking about this rehost or this lift and shift, what we're doing is we're taking the infrastructure as it is today and moving it up into Azure. So if you have a virtual server running, there's almost no reason for it not to be able to work in Azure. There are some specific scenarios where you have to have certain considerations and where the data is and some other things. But I have not seen infrastructure not be able to run in Azure as an IaaS server that runs on-prem. There may be certain considerations, certain remediation steps for some specific unique scenarios, but 98% of things just run as is when you move it up to Azure without any issues. That's just the reality. All you're doing is moving bit by bit the actual machine up into Azure to let it run in Microsoft's data center. When we look at a migration process, Coretek has a 5-week migration process that we leverage. Sometimes we'll shorten this up for smaller migrations, but again, we're talking about complex, bigger migrations. And ultimately, what you do is you define migration groups, and you stagger them through this 5-week process. So you'll always have different, depending on the size of your organization, the size of the migration build groups. You'll always have a set of servers or a set of infrastructure running in each of these different weeks. So we use a T-minus schedule. T-0 is the week of migration. T-1 is the week before migration. T-2 is 2 weeks, and T-3 is 3 weeks. And we do that so it's easy to say T-2, okay, that's 2 weeks away from the migration. That way you can easily tell, and everybody can be on the same page from a migration perspective. But really what it boils down to is T-3 is about communication and planning the deployment. T-2 is about building test plans and submitting any sort of change controls that's required. T-1 is actually testing your applications in Azure, so you can do failover testings in an isolated environment for test purposes only. And then T-0 is where you actually do the migration and any sort of post cleanup, and T+1 is, of course, post-migration support plus transitioning to your operational support side of things. So this is a good checklist for you. We do have a more detailed checklist. Feel free to reach out to me directly via LinkedIn if you'd like access to a more detailed checklist for this 5-week process. Be happy to share that. Again, as we're talking about this lift and shift or rehost platform, you can virtually move any workload that runs today. And again, ASR or Azure Migrate are the 2 biggest tools that you'll use. There is another one to talk about, Azure Database Migration Assistant. Forget the migration in there, but Azure Database Migration Assistant, or also known as DMA tool, that can help you with your SQL migration specifically. As we move into the manage phase, really what this is about is ensuring that you have operational ITIL founded processes in place so that you can quickly and easily manage your environment to ensure it's up and running. One of the first things you want to do operationally is set up a cloud center of excellence. And really ultimately what that is it is a group of individuals to help you govern and set standards and direction for your cloud. That can be a couple of people, or it can be a dozen people. You don't want it to get too large, but you also need influence from a bunch of different groups like networking, storage. You want your infrastructure team, your apps team represented, business, line of business represented in it. That way you can ensure that you have standards and consistency for your organization as you continue to move to the cloud, because there's so many different things that you can do. The other thing that this will do is it will drive innovation. So if you're a technologist that likes to do new cool stuff, this is one of the best things you can do so that you can drive innovation in your company. If you can get support of this team to be able to do innovative new technologies, they will drive it rather than forcing you to try to always drive it. So if you always feel like you're carrying the torch and forcing people to do it, start one of these. There's a good section in the CAF, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework section about it. Start one of these, and this will help you so other people carry that torch for you. As you go through and you look at governance and defining your corporate policy, there are 5 key discipline areas of cloud governance as you're looking about your support model. How do you manage your templates and scripts and configurations? How are you doing that? How are you controlling it and defining that process? Are you using Azure DevOps? Are you using a different tool set for that? Are you using SCCM? How are you managing your application deployment? How are you consistently leveraging DevOps tools across teams? That's the key thing. It's easy to get started and define it with a single team, but how do you use it across multiple teams, and making sure you define that? And these are the kind of things that the Cloud Center of Excellence would govern and control and look at and help give guidelines and policies around. Identifying your identity baseline. So what solution are you using for actual identity and credentials and assignments? How are you managing that? Looking at resource consistency. So how are you ensuring that monitoring is implemented and AV's implemented and all sorts of tool sets that you leverage? How are you ensuring that that's happening? What's your security baseline? How are you actually ensuring your compliance that's required for your business, whether it be formally required based on the sector business you're in, or just NIST and looking at different security control best practices? How are you handling that? And then what are your cost management strategies? How are you evaluating and monitoring your costs? That's so critical in the Azure world. A lot of people get burned quickly because they just start spinning up a bunch of stuff and they allow a lot of people to do it. And then they all of a sudden have a sour taste in their mouth about cloud because there's no controller on it. That is not the case. Put that control up front, make sure you have it, and you have plans around that. And again, there's great resources out there under Microsoft's cloud adoption framework model. As we look into optimization, really what you're looking at is modernizing the apps and moving them to PaaS type workloads. There are a lot of other things for cloud native applications and other things that you can go through, but for purposes of this, we're talking about a data center migration. The next step is really to start looking at PaaS workloads. Here's the sample engagement that Coretek offers in partnership with Microsoft that will give you a quick, easy way to migrate 1 to 5 applications, and ultimately will give you the confidence and skills needed so that you can do it in the future yourself if you choose to. The engagement approach is usually about a 6-week engagement. And really, ultimately, what we're looking at is defining what the goals and objectives. Again, we go back to that CAF model. We understand what's your motivation and what's your business objective or your outcomes expected. Going into architecture, design, and review. Then going into migration and plan. So what's the actual migration plan? And then actually doing the app modernization for you once it's already up there in Azure and looking at it. We leverage a tool called Unified Cloud or Cloud Pilot for our specific scenario of this. There are other tools out there for it, but ultimately what Cloud Pilot does is it gives you the ability to scan static code and really understand what's going on with your environment and understand what changes need to be made to that code in order to leverage different Azure PaaS or app services. So Azure App Services, Azure SQL PaaS, other tool sets like that. Cost management will give you some ideas budget-wise and some work effort estimates for standard code changes based on the complexity of your applications that are going through that. How to get started. So reach out to us. We'll be happy to give you any information regarding Coretek. Reach out to me directly if you just want advice or just want someone to talk through what your plan is. I'm happy to do that. LinkedIn's a great way to find me. Coretek specifically, we can definitely help you guys drive your migration initiatives. We can help from a lot of different aspects. We can also help manage those long-term for you and provide that governance if that's something you're looking for. And really, when we look at it, ultimately, the next step engagements are really to start that cloud economic assessment to get started and really understand what your environment should be, and then jumping into a CAF or design and pilot of your Azure environment engagement, and then looking longer term into app modernization. You can find the Azure Migration Strategy, 5 Key Steps to Your Success white paper. If you go to coretek.com and click on Azure Solutions, Azure Migrations, you can find a link to the Azure Migration Strategy document. Feel free to download that. You can also find it from the URL in this slide. And again, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to share any information with you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Clint. Really appreciate it. I know we are at time, but there are a couple of questions in the chat window, and I'm just going to roll them up into two questions for you just to consolidate. So this one really goes to, does the cloud economic assessment offer different scenarios, or is it a one type of solution or one recommendation?
Great question. So the cloud economic assessment, the way we approach it specifically from a Coretek side, is we look at a few different scenarios. We look at a full data center migration, what that would be, but then also we break it up into specific use cases. So those use cases could be implementing DR and backup as a solution for you, or it could be a specific data center, or even just specific line of business applications that make sense to migrate up. But we break it down into an overall strategy and then also specific workload strategies.
Right. And then there was another thread from a couple of people that really talked about if you execute the assessment and you go to that next phase, when do you refresh it, or is it something that now your cloud center of excellence takes on? How does it do from an ongoing perspective?
Yeah, great question. So as you're continuing to evolve, when you're moving from the traditional way we do business on-prem to the way we do business now, leveraging cloud technologies. Cloud technologies are very iterative. You're constantly refreshing and constantly changing and tweaking and looking at what's working and what's not, and pivoting and making directional changes based on what's working. So that will be a continuous process for you. Definitely the Cloud Center of Excellence would be a key piece of that, driving and controlling and managing and evolving that. You definitely will need to keep that up long term.
Right. And then the final comment was, you mentioned some links around security that was available. If we could include those in a blog statement for the group, and we'll forward it out to everybody so they have those links, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Clinton. Thank you for everyone who joined us today for Tech Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we'll be doing a presentation on Security Operations Center as a Service. So Jim Hunter, the CISO from Coretek Services, will be speaking on that topic. Please reach out to coretek.com/events, and you can register for that. And the recordings are available on coretek.com under the webinar link under resources. Thank you again. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.